Hey guys, it's Lady and welcome back to the series of videos where I break down everything about our favorite Genshin characters. From stories unlocked via raising companionship levels, to voice lines said by other characters, to appearances in event quests, and so on. In other words, whether you don't have a specific character, can't be bothered to raise their companionship levels, need a refresher, or just want the basic TLDR of a character's text, then this ultimate lore guide is for you. Now, thanks to her rerun in patch 2.5, as well as her being my absolute favorite unit on my alt account, this video will focus on the leader of Watatsumi Island, Enkanomiya Kokomi. So let's begin by going over the lore from her character stories that are unlocked via companionship leveling. I just think this info will provide better context for Kokomi's actions in the actual game, which we'll discuss later. But with that said, one of the most notable things about Kokomi is that she is the divine priestess of Watatsumi Island. This role stems from the bloodline of the Enkanomiya clan, and with it comes the responsibility of defending Watatsumi Island in Orobashi's stead. And who is Orobashi, you ask? Well, Orobashi was the divine god of Watatsumi's ancestral heritage, back when the people still lived in Enkanomiya. It was only by his grace that their civilization was brought forth from the depths of the sea, though unfortunately, it was not without great cost. Soon afterwards, Orobashi was slain on Yashiori Island by the Archon. But his desire to bring prosperity to his people lives on in each divine priestess who ascends to the role. And by the way, I'll touch a bit more on Watatsumi's history and Orobashi a little later in the video, so stay tuned for that. But anyway, in regards to Kokomi, she has become a beloved figure in her own right, though it didn't always start off that way. In fact, back when she first ascended as the Divine Priestess, all in attendance couldn't help but note how young she appeared. And thus, none took her seriously at first. There were even a number of ambitious individuals who hatched devious plots that day, thinking they could take advantage of this young woman's supposed inexperience. But ultimately, nothing would come out of these plans, since Kokomi proved more than capable of leading Watatsumi Island. She was fair in distributing rewards and punishments alike, and also acknowledged the contributions of each individual on the island. And as war emerged within Inazuma, her military tactics resulted in victories for the resistance, despite their smaller numbers and fewer resources compared to the shogunate army. It was all these abilities combined that quickly won over the will of the people, to the point where they now willingly listen to all the directives she issues. You see, Kokomi tries her best to know Watatsumi's enemies, and thus predict all possible scenarios beforehand, all in an effort to devise strategies ahead of time that her subordinates can implement as the situation calls for. While these directives have been cumbersome at times, considering how thick and heavy they normally are, they've nevertheless ensured the stable development and peace of Watatsumi Island. And just as a side note, this video isn't meant to examine whether Kokomi's strategy and lore was implemented well or not in the narrative. I'm just relaying what we've been told via her companionship stories. But continuing on this topic, many factors are involved in deciding victory or defeat on the battlefield. Terrain, weather, equipment quality, and so on are all vital things for a military strategist to consider. Yet, many study the details too closely, or make the mistake of viewing a situation only in a vacuum. But fortunately for the Resistance, Kokomi is the one who can grasp both the big picture and the small details. Her countless hours of study over these things, and her willingness to address her faults in an effort to become better, have ultimately led to miracles on the front lines and the least amount of casualties possible. Though as more talented individuals have been appointed to office over time, Kokomi has seen fewer need to deliver such comprehensive directives, meaning her burdens have lessened somewhat, which is a definite win in her eyes. 'Cause you see, Kokomi has always been quite introverted in that she gains energy from time spent alone. She's especially enjoyed the solitary pursuit of reading since her youth, and it's this very hobby that has resulted in her broad store of knowledge in so many fields in the first place. Burying her head in books wasn't great for social interaction though, which is something that hasn't come naturally for her, and is in fact something she's had to actively nurture once she became Divine Priestess. It's just one of many things she had no choice but to learn for the sake of her people. But as one can guess, forcing herself to do all these things she has little interest in is incredibly taxing on her energy stores. And so, Kokomi has actually developed a method of self-care for herself via monitoring her energy levels at any given time. Whenever she runs out of energy, she'll temporarily put aside her role as Divine Priestess and instead resume being an ordinary homebody. Doing things she enjoys, such as engrossing herself in complex military stratagems, replenishes her energy stores, while vice versa holds true. Kokomi also enjoys taking in the natural beauty of Watatsumi Island in the limited amount of free time her schedule permits. Now, this is something I'll revisit later on in this video, but to wrap up Kokomi's inherent difficulties with serving in such a people-centric role, at the end of the day, she does acknowledge and value the ability to enact real change for Watatsumi citizens that this very position affords her. Which now brings us to the topic of her vision. Her wish has always been to protect Watatsumi Island and foster a place where the people can lead happy lives. As a leader, she respects the will of each person and hopes that each can find their own way. In other words, the complete opposite belief of the Raiden shoguns. So when the Vision Hunt decree first went into effect, Kokomi heard the people's cries of resentment and thus agreed to lead them under the banner of resistance. But once the war was over and the vast majority of people turned towards peace and stability, Kokomi herself followed their will and steered her focus to governance and economics. Now, with her background covered, I think it's a good time to transition to her appearances in the actual game, starting with Act 2 of the Inazuma Archon quest, where she makes quite the entrance. The Traveler is currently helping the Resistance fend off an onslaught of shogunate forces, though honestly it's not going so well for Goro and his troops. Just when things really start to look dire, Kokomi seemingly materializes out of nowhere with much needed reinforcements in tow. These reinforcements being Beidou and her Crux crew, including Kazuha, who were all hired on as mercenaries. Their addition to the battle is enough for Kujo Sara to pull back her troops, which finally gives Kokomi a chance to reconvene with Goro. She knows it hasn't been easy holding the front lines here, and appreciates all that he's done to make most of the resources they have. She'll at least be leaving this new band of mercs with him to help relieve some of the burden. Then later, once Traveler reaches Watatsumi Island and Enkanomiya Shrine for the first time, they find Kokomi busy taking care of logistical matters. The Resistance has been hard-pressed for food and medical supplies, but she promises things will be getting better soon since she's just secured a new sponsor. It turns out that the letter she received is from a mystery donor, though they promised much needed resupplies as long as the resistance continued to fight the shogunate army with everything they had. Now, this definitely sounds pretty sus to the traveler, and Kokomi definitely has some suspicions herself, but ultimately, Watatsumi just can't afford to turn this extra help away, since they're not exactly the most affluent island. Kokomi is clearly just very happy that she'll be able to reward the hard work of the resistance troops with these new supplies, like some quality meat that the men haven't had in a long time. Lastly, Kokomi mentions that they can't know for sure when the Vision Hunt decree will end, nor how long they will have to continue the fight. Yet, the traveler agrees to help despite all these things. So we are then promoted to Captain of Swordfish 2, the elite platoon of the resistance forces. And as for the traveler's buddy Teppei, even if he isn't as skilled as these elite soldiers, Kokomi does find a suitable assignment for him. So fast forwarding after taking care of some vital tasks for the resistance, we return to Enkanomiya Shrine to report to Kokomi, right as she's speaking with Goro, both whom are deeply concerned. Turns out Goro and his officers have noticed that some of the soldiers have been exhibiting symptoms of rapid aging, and after doing some investigating, they managed to seize one of these strange weapons that were apparently handed out by Watatsumi's new sponsors. Traveler instantly recognizes it as a Fatui delusion, which has Kokomi ordering an immediate seizure of all such delusions, hoping it's not too late for the troops. Now, at this time, Traveler has already rushed to Boro village to look for Teppei, and manages to catch him in his final conscious moments. After this loss, Kokomi tries to dissuade Traveler from confronting the Fatui alone, simply because she thinks it's too risky and doesn't want to lose any more courageous soldiers. But in the end, she acknowledges our abilities, and therefore shares vital intel on where the Fatui must be secretly manufacturing these delusions. Traveler then heads off to confront the Fatui, while Kokomi herself rushes to the front lines to keep morale up. The resistance just can't risk a shogunate attack now while they're still scrambling to recover from this devastating situation. Fast forwarding all the way to the end of the Inazuma Archon quest and the end of the war, Kokomi is seen in the final cinematic cutscene paying respects to Teppei and all the other fallen soldiers. Now, moving on to Act 1 of Kokomi's story quest, we return to Watatsumi for the upcoming victory feast, meant to celebrate the end of the war. But there seems to be a suspicious hush-hush atmosphere among some of the soldiers, a feeling that's reinforced when we come across two of them detaining a merchant from the Tenryou Commission. This is when Kokomi steps in and learns that the merchant is being accused of allegedly colluding with the Fatui. She knows of the rumors spreading around about how the upcoming peace talks with the Tenryou Commission are just a trap, so due to the instability of the current situation, Kokomi decides to investigate the merchant's story personally with the traveler's help. So after defeating the Fatui and scouring their camp, we find that the merchant was hoarding food and medicinal supplies prior to them being stolen. In other words, Kokomi concludes that he's simply an opportunist and not a nefarious colluder. Though it's a real mystery why he thought he could make a profit off these items, considering Kokomi already issued the post-war temporary decree, which restricts the price that can be charged for necessary goods. It just looks like he didn't read the new law. But anyway, we return and establish the merchant's innocence with solid evidence, though Kokomi makes sure this does not negate his punishment for hoarding much-needed post-war supplies from the citizens. Now, regarding some of the riled up soldiers, some of the villagers appear this way too. So remember how the shogun was responsible for Orobashi's death? Well, it's just hard for some villagers to let go of this resentment, though there are clearly also others who are just happy for peace. Kokomi also gets swamped by the locals of the village, some with requests, and others who simply just wish to speak with the divine priestess. She seems to handle it well, but it sure takes a lot out of her. And not only that, but she has a meeting with the textile industry right after, so we must part ways here for now. The next day, Kokomi is nowhere to be seen at the shrine, though one of the guards parses through the directives she's given him and finds a particularly specific one meant only for those of VIP status. It directs us to Kokomi's secret hideout, where we find her utterly exhausted from the day prior. She reveals that she never actually wanted to become Divine Priestess, but there was no way around it considering how it's something that just comes with her bloodline. So we do what we can to help poor Kokomi out and read her favorite military treatise to her. She ends up falling asleep, but it turns out to be a good thing when we decide to just let her rest, since she wakes up having recovered many energy points. Remember her system we talked about earlier? That night, her speech is generally well received at the Victory Feast, where she thanks all civilians and soldiers alike for their efforts and sacrifice during the war. However, Traveler finds that a conspirator group of troops just can't accept this peace, not after losing their fellow comrades to the Tenryou forces during the war. These warmongering soldiers are the ones responsible for fabricating the rumors about collusion between the Fatui and Tenryou Commission, and even have some moles stationed among the guards where the peace talks will be held tomorrow. But even though we relay this info to Kokomi, she knows she can't switch out the guards now or else it'll raise everyone's suspicions. So there really is no choice but to play it by ear. The following day, the negotiations between Enkanomiya Kokomi and Kujo Sara proceed quite smoothly, with neither side having to make any major concessions, though things take a turn for the worse when Sara stipulates that the Watatsumi forces must come under the single banner of the Inazuman army. That's when the conspirators within the Watatsumi ranks decide to make their move and nearly ignite another conflict. Fortunately though, Kokomi's calm response and clever framing of the situation actually turns the tables on Sara and puts her on the defensive. When the latter questions a few of her own troops, it turns out there was a small inkling of Fatui contact with some of her men, which she finds absolutely unacceptable. She ends up apologizing for the Tenryou's internal problems and sets aside the Watatsumi troop issue for the time being. Back in Boro village, Kokomi reprimands the soldiers who nearly sabotage the peace talks. They're all lucky that some Tenryou collusion with the Fatui was true to some extent, but nevertheless, Kokomi reminds these soldiers that many civilians suffered terribly during the war and that it wouldn't be fair to sabotage the peace only for innocent people to get wrapped up in the conflict again. But instead of disbanding these troops entirely, Kokomi chooses to respect their dedication to protecting Watatsumi and turns their platoon into a special ops division, something they're all very grateful for. Finally, Kokomi shares that it's truly hard finding a balance that'll make every person happy. But even so, she'll continue to try her best as a divine priestess. As for any patch-specific events, Kokomi has only shown up in one so far, that being patch 2.5's 3 Realms Gateway offering, starring Enkanomiya. Watatsumi Island is in big trouble right now, since Kokomi has just recently performed the Watatsumi Goryo Matsuri, and yet the phenomenon it's supposed to counteract hasn't receded at all. You see, the earth of Watatsumi is constantly going through a bleaching process, slowly turning into holy soil that is devoid of nutrients, which of course is devastating to the island's agricultural production. However, by recovering a blood jade coral from Enkanomiya, an item that's infused with Orobashi's power, the divine priestess can get this holy soil phenomenon to recede. Only this time, even though Kokomi performed the ceremony perfectly, the phenomenon has only halted, instead of reverting like it should have. Since this has never happened before in all of Watatsumi's history, Kokomi sent all she could spare to investigate Enkanomiya. The reports all point to a strange darkness and never-before-seen humanoid monsters that are causing great trouble for those sent down there, so Kokomi asked the traveler for their assistance. Now Tsuyuko, the shrine maiden Kokomi has placed in charge of Enkanomiyan affairs, adds on that there's a shrine maiden by the name of Tsumi who has been treating their wounded down in the depths, and has even been holding the darkness at bay from the area around the Dainichi Mikoshi. Now this is both intriguing and suspicious to Kokomi, since there's no record of any such shrine maiden in the Sangonomiya records. She wishes to meet this Tsumi, but Tsuyuko can't have the leader of Watatsumi Island head into such a dangerous and unknown situation. So since she can't join us, Kokomi gives travelers some sort of missing piece of something, and cryptically tells us that we may find it helpful if we're faced with a difficult decision. Fast forwarding through the entire exploration event, we finally reach the climax where it's revealed that Tsumi had been plotting to destroy the Dainichi Mikoshi all along as a supposed bishop person. Now, this is where Kokomi's foresight plays its proper role. Traveler hands that peculiar item to Tsumi, who's completely taken aback at how perfectly it fits with these other two pendant pieces that she's had for as long as she can remember. She's obviously shaken by the implication that she might not be of bishop kind like she was led to believe, having been raised by them her entire life. In the end, though, Tsumi decides to leave the Dainichi Mikoshi as it is for now, and disappears. Now, just to briefly explain the lore and animosity between bishops and humans, by the way, it's the dragons who were the original inhabitants of Tevat, and bishops are their descendants. At some point, prior to the establishment of even Celestia, the Primordial One arrived in Tevat and proceeded to annihilate the dragon kind, ousting them from their own lands. The Primordial One then created the human realm, though sometime after, a war broke out with this supposed second one who came, which resulted in Enkanomiya sinking into the depths of the ocean. Sometime after that, Abrax created the Helios, which provided enough light to keep the bishops away from the humans of Enkanomiya. So obviously there's much more to this than what I described, but since Enkanomiya isn't the main point of this video, for brevity's sake, just know that the bishops will always hate the humans since they stem from the Primordial One who has taken their very home away from them. Now back to the event, Traveler returns to the surface and reports everything that went down to Kokomi. It turns out that the pendant piece she gave us is actually a relic from the time Orobashi first became the people's god and overthrew the reign of the Sun Children in Enkanomiya. He gave 3 pendants to the Dainichi Mikoshi, Sangonomiya line, and vassals of Watatsumi respectively. the original intent being for all three to hold each other accountable. But fast forwarding to present day, and it's only the common folk, led by the Enkanomiya line, who have flourished, meaning the pendant has little use to Kokomi now anyway. As for the vassals of Watatsumi, not a single one was born after Orobashi exhausted his power creating Watatsumi Island. Now, the records mention that the last of the vassals and her shrine maiden were attacked by bishops at the border between Enkanomiya and Watatsumi Island. Most believe that they died that day, though there are some who believe that the vassal survived and was raised by the bishops. And so, since there's no longer any territorial dispute between them and the humans now that the latter have left Enkanomiya for Watatsumi Island permanently, Kokomi hopes that this Tsumi is able to find the place she belongs eventually. But with that said, considering everything that's happened in Enkanomiya, Kokomi begins to consider finding some other possible way to reverse the holy soil phenomenon without having to rely on the blood jade coral. Though, thanks to the traveler's help, this issue is at least resolved for some decades to come. So now we've arrived at the final section of this video, with that being Kokomi's thoughts on other characters and vice versa, as well as some miscellaneous things about her in general. So let's start off with her most trusted companion within Watatsumi's forces, General Goro. Kokomi values Goro's creative battle plans and the strong camaraderie he builds with his troops. This makes him a truly exceptional general in her eyes. Well, except for the times when he lets the excitement of battle get to his head. Goro himself has the utmost respect for her excellency and her ingenious strategies. But he's also quite good at reading others, so he can see that deep down, Kokomi actually prefers quiet time away from her busy role as Divine Priestess. So he tries not to disturb her whenever she does have downtime. Kazuha also looks up to Kokomi, as does everyone in all honesty. He can see how she always tries her best to keep casualties to a minimum, but seeing how she's also in charge of handling the internal and external affairs of Watatsumi, he can't help but wonder if that's not a bit much for just one person. Meanwhile, Kokomi respects him as an outstanding swordsman and just a refined character in general. She appreciates how he follows every command to a T while fighting with the resistance, even though she knows he's a carefree personality who normally doesn't like constraints. Now, regarding the Crux Fleet's captain, at first Kokomi was rather doubtful of Beidou and her crew's abilities. But after seeing how skilled they were at conducting raids without being detected by the enemy, Kokomi is now more than happy to have Beidou instruct the resistance troops. But that's enough about Kokomi's allies. What do her now former adversaries think of her? Well, Kujo Sada recognizes how capable she is at military strategy and has even considered adopting some of Kokomi's ingenious directives for the shogunate army. On the other hand, Kokomi does find the open warfare of Sada and her troops quite admirable, even if her strategy seems somewhat lacking. Sara's troops definitely are united under her command. Now, moving on to the Raiden Shogun, in what may come as a surprise to many, Kokomi doesn't actually care to scrutinize her actions now that the war is over. But if the Shogun ever does cast aside the people's aspirations once more, Kokomi won't just sit back and watch. Now, the Raiden Shogun's thoughts on Kokomi are obviously from back when the war was at full scale. She says Kokomi must be held accountable for destroying the local Narukami shrine on Yashiori Island. You see, a handful of resistance troops, without Kokomi's permission by the way, broke the wards that kept the Tatarigami at bay, all in the hopes that it would revive Orobashi. And well, The tragic outcome is told in Yashiori Island's world quests and notes found via exploration. Long story short, the shogun was definitely not happy that so many of her forces fell victim to this curse, even though Kokomi herself had nothing to do with it. And as for Ei's friend, Guji Yae, Kokomi holds her in very high regard, not only as an outstanding shrine maiden, but also because she's responsible for establishing the Yae publishing house. Kokomi's favorite of their stock is the Tevat Art of War, a reference to, in real life, Sun Tzu's Art of War, by the way. Plus, she's also a huge fan of Albedo and Xingqiu's light novel, A Legend of Sword. In fact, you can catch her reading one of its volumes in her idol animation. But to wrap up Voicelines about other characters, even though Shikanoin Heizo isn't even out yet, Kokomi already has something to say about this self-proclaimed detective. Apparently, he just brazenly entered Watatsumi wearing a 10-reel commission uniform and all, just for some sightseeing. He claimed to have no interest in military or governmental affairs, so Kokomi allowed him to stay on the island, though not without setting a few eyes on him. But speaking of Watatsumi sightseeing, one of Kokomi's favorite things to do is to go on solitary walks on the island in what little free time she has. She avoids the crowds and chooses the violet forests and remote shorelines instead, finding the sound of the waves relaxing to the soul. At times, she'll even go diving, allowing all her worries to sink into the ocean depths amidst all the schools of fish. Kokomi's love of natural beauty resonates with me on a personal level, as someone who really enjoyed hiking and sometimes even backpacking prior to contracting my neurological disease. But anyway, Kokomi truly treasures every site there is on Watatsumi Island, including every citizen who lives here. But while the scenery remains the same, the people's hearts are complex and changeable. On top of that, the public is easily swayed by her since she holds the highest position on the island. There was even a time where the things she liked became fashionable, while her dislikes fell out of societal favor. But Kokomi had no wish to affect the people's lives in this way, so since then, she's rarely revealed her personal taste to the public, and instead chooses to treat all things in an egalitarian manner. Which brings us to her food preferences. In all actuality, seafood dishes are her least favorite thing. But the fishing industry is so vital to Watatsumi, so she keeps this strictly confidential. On the other hand, her favorite food says a lot about who she is as a leader, since a big reason why she loves bird egg sushi is that its ingredients are easy to procure, it's simple to prepare, and most of all, seems to bring great satisfaction to the soldiers. With that said, I find it rather sad that Kokomi's lore is all very well and good, but she's just one of those examples where the execution didn't really do her justice. I'm actually working on a theory video that explores the possibility that Kokomi's, as well as other Inazuman characters' release dates were shuffled around due to development progress of their respective kits. As someone who also enjoys diving into the gameplay mechanics of Genshin, I couldn't help but view the gameplay theory that has been going around the CN community, and wonder if it may have also changed up some of the story beats of the Inazuman arc last minute, like how Yoimiya could have been our actual intro character instead of Kazuha, or how Yae and Kokomi's releases might have been switched. I'll have the video in the cards in the description once it's done, so if that interests you, be sure to check it out. Otherwise, I admire Kokomi as a character, given that she is an interesting foil to A in many ways, given how neither of them really wanted the super important roles they now serve in, yet nevertheless, they've both been doing their best for the people, misguided ideals or not. But anyway, it'd be great to hear what you guys think about Kokomi's story presence in the comments. Also, please like and subscribe if you enjoy this series of lore videos. Any updates I do for Kokomi in the future will be linked in the pinned comment below. Also, we'd love to have you join our very welcoming and active Discord community at discord.gg/LadyVirgilia. Plus, check out my Persona and Trails channel if you like analyses on this series. But otherwise, thanks for watching guys, and take care. See ya!